Whether it's productivity advice or content creation advice or whatever fill in the blank sales strategy is the must do of the moment, for some of us, the usual advice just doesn't seem to work, no matter how hard we try. If whatever the gurus are telling you to do feels like pushing boulders uphill, then today's episode is for you. Welcome to the Soulful Sales Show, where we talk about believing in the value of your offers, getting them in front of your right people, and selling more of what you do in your unique way. Hi, and welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Sales Show. So today I am chatting with Claire Paniccia all about running your business alongside your neurodivergence. I know I have a lot of neurodivergent listeners here, but there could also be other reasons why you can't conform to traditional business advice. Maybe you live with a chronic illness, maybe you are running your business in any spare second you have alongside caring responsibilities, maybe you have mental health stuff going on, or maybe you find it hard to align your strategy to your values. Whichever of those describes you, I think you are going to love this chat. So let me introduce you to Claire Paniccia, business coach for neurodivergent and spoony online entrepreneurs and creator of the Neurodiverse Entrepreneur Summit, which I am speaking at, and you can join that at ruthpoundwhite.com/NE Summit, all one word. Claire is obsessed with helping neurodiverse and spoony online entrepreneurs build their business in a way that works for them. And she is on a mission to prove that you absolutely can build a successful online business even if you do things differently than you are supposed to. This was honestly one of my favorite podcast chats. It was so affirming. And as well as all the stuff I just mentioned, we also talk a lot about infusing our values into the work that we do as well, and how that specifically relates to the sales methods we use. Plus, as well, the fear that so many of us have of getting it all wrong. I'm sure that you can relate to that. So enjoy. So I am honored to be a part of your wonderful Neurodiverse Entrepreneur Summit. And I thought I would start by asking you, what makes you so passionate about working with neurodiverse business owners in your summit, but also in general?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I was just journaling about this the other day. Basically, it kind of happened organically over time as I realized that I was neurodivergent, but also I think the reason that I'm so passionate about it is because for so many of us, like autistic and ADHD people are unemployed at insane rates. Like I don't know the percentages off the top of my head because I'm not a numbers person, but like for so many of us, self-employment is the only option. I was just talking to my partner the other day about how like I will always make my business work because I don't think employment is an option for me. I always joke that I'm unemployable because I'm so like boo authority. But really it's just that I have accommodated myself so much and so effectively over the years that I know that an employment situation would never accommodate me to this level and to the level that I need. And so this really is the only option. And we live in a capitalist soup and need money to thrive. And so we need to run businesses in order to make money. And for so many of us, this really feels like the only option and is the only option. And so it's so important then to be able to run your business in a way that works for you and for your brain and for your body. And that can be really hard if you've never really seen anyone else do that, if that's never been modeled for you, how to make those decisions. And so because of that, it's really been important to me or become important to me to kind of be a permission slip and a model and like a big business sibling almost
Oh,
for neurodivergent entrepreneurs.
I love that. I've had the same realization. I feel the same. Like I feel my eyes over the last 1.5 years have been open so much to the ways that I have accommodated myself through my business.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. And
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's wild. I really would struggle if I had to just go and get a regular job. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. And like in this economy, that's something that so many of us are actually considering is getting like part-time jobs or full-time jobs as like financial oxygen. And like no judgment at all, no shame, but I really don't think I could. I don't think I would manage.
Yeah, yeah, I get it. So let's talk a bit specifically about selling when it comes to the traditional selling advice and how that does or doesn't gel with the way that neurodivergent brains work. Um, I don't know if you have any specific examples. I know that you're really mindful about the way that you sell. I mean, I've seen it as a speaker at your summit, like some of the practices that you're being really intentional with about how you're selling that. Yeah, if you have any examples to share or any just general thoughts about the selling advice and how we can adapt that to work better for our unique array of brains.
Yeah. I mean, and this is annoyingly true for like every piece of advice that I give is it depends. And I am like, I love nuance in everything. And it does make giving answers to questions like these more complicated. But basically, traditional advice, there's certain things that are just like a hard no. Like, I think very something that I've learned from early in my business when I was learning from whoever I was learning from were a lot of like sales bros. Um, of like get their credit card information on the call and like high pressure, high energy, high like stakes, and that's just gross because one, it's a lot for my nervous system to hold that kind of energy of like that like yee high energy, amp them up and then take their money right away. It's a lot for my nervous system to hold that state. And also, it's gross in terms of you're exploiting their nervous system in order to make money. Um, so there's kind of like the neurodivergent half, and then there's the like values aligned half of my answer to this question. Um, so like obviously that's out the window, but I think a lot of the like tactics that we see often like taught or debated in the online entrepreneur space that doesn't use that kind of stuff and tends to be slightly more mindful, like for example, countdown timers for urgency. There's a lot of debate that I've seen in like my corner of the internet of like, are those exploitative and gross or are they helpful containers? And honestly, I think it depends on how you're using them and like your intentions using them and um also just how they feel to you. Like if you feel gross about them, don't use them. But if you don't feel gross about them, then yes, use them, but like don't be gross about it. As an ADHD person, I find countdown timers to be very helpful because if they kind of close the loop in my brain on a purchasing decision. If there's no countdown timer, then I'm just constantly wondering in the back of my brain, like, oh, should I buy that? Oh, should I buy that? Oh, should I buy that? I don't know. Maybe I shouldn't buy that. Should I buy that? Yeah, I think I should buy that. I don't know. Let's wait and see. And it's like, okay, if there's a countdown timer for 5 days or even 20 minutes, it's like, okay, great. That deal is no longer even available. I can just stop thinking about it. But I also can see how for people with anxiety, that it feels very like anxiety inducing and kind of exploiting a panic state. And so there's definitely a needle to thread there if someone does like, and I use countdown timers and there's a needle to thread there. Um, and I think it's just a matter of figuring out where your needle is on the like scale of how to use a certain sales tactic. I don't know if that answered your question, but
Yeah. I totally agree. I mean, I feel the same about countdown time. It's like that's a really good example because that's one that really gets people divided. Yeah.
it really does. Yeah. And like there's so many different sales tactics, like selling in the DMs or selling in webinars or using fast action. Like there's so many tactics for sales. And I always say there's a difference between tactics and strategy. Like strategy is much more foundational, like the foundations of solid business. But a tactic is like a countdown timer or DMs or like whatever the algorithms are favoring at the moment. Um, so tactics, I think, do tend to provide really great like illustrations of what I'm saying because I'm bad at explaining things without illustrations.
No, I totally get it. And one thing that comes to mind for me is like, because I work with a lot of neurodivergent humans,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people who would describe themselves as highly sensitive as well. And what I have witnessed is a lot of us, I include myself in this, tie ourselves up in knots trying to do the right thing. Like we really genuinely
Yeah.
care. Like
Hmm.
I'm not worried about anyone that I'm working with that they're deliberately doing something manipulative and pushy. But I am worried that they're making it hard. And I don't even want to describe it as them making it harder for themselves, but it then gets harder for them to move forward and do what they want to do in their business because they're tying themselves up in knots and getting really, worried about the effect that their selling is going to have.
Yeah, no, that's so true. The like almost I have heard this term before, like moral OCD is actually a thing that can be diagnosed as like a type of OCD where you may not be OCD about your environment, but you're OCD about your ethics and your morals. And I do find that yeah, a lot of highly sensitive people, a lot of neurodivergent people tend to be much more concerned about being ethically aligned, which is fabulous. And also, I think you're so right. It can hold so many of us back in terms of being so worried about doing something wrong that we don't end up doing anything or almost doing it halfway, which doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help our businesses, it doesn't help us, and it doesn't help our ideal people who we are trying to serve with our businesses and our offers. We have to get them in front of them in order to help them with that. And that's always the kind of the reframe that I offer people that come to me with similar issues or similar questions is like, your stuff is good and good for people, and therefore people want to hear about it, and it is of service to sell in that way. And that's such a hard shift for so many of us who, like, again, we live in capitalist soup, and it can be very hard to kind of unwire that thinking of like selling is evil almost. I think a lot of us, especially people who were socialized as women growing up, we have a tendency to default to thinking of selling as evil, and like the stereotype of like the gross car salesman or something like that. But selling is not inherently evil. I think it has the potential, just like anything, to be used grossly and also used to help people.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
What would you say to these people who are, okay, I get it, and I'm running around in circles deciding, should I have a countdown timer? Should I put a deadline on this thing? How would you approach that?
I would, well, it would depend on the person, but I probably say like, okay, what's the middle option that is not so taxing on your nervous system? Like what is a version of that? So like, yeah, countdown timers, you're feeling all twisted up about in your nervous system. What's a version of that we could have a similar effect of creating a sense of container, time container for our offer without triggering your nervous system? So like maybe you're not using a countdown timer, or you're having a longer time frame, or um there are always creative ways to approach a particular strategy. Sure, countdown timers may be the default in our industry, but there are other ways to create the same effect without using whatever tactic is triggering you. And so we can get creative about taking a new spin on the same. And this is what I mean about tactics versus strategies. We can take a new spin on the strategy with a different tactic and have the same effect. If a certain tactic feels gross to you, or is triggering you, or is stopping you from selling, then let's figure out a new tactic to approach the same strategy. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, it does. And I think something that was helpful for me as well is just remembering, you know what, if I do get it wrong, and I either decide it feels wrong internally, or, I get backlash, which is so unlikely with like the size of my audience. Like,
Yeah.
but I know that this is a thing that
Yeah.
we worry about. If it happens, I'll be open. I'll be open-minded and I'll listen and
And
talk
you'll
about it.
survive.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is like whenever our nervous systems get activated in that way, like the fear is like what our body is saying is if you do this, you might die.
Hmm.
Like that is the like evolutionary biological thing that's happening. The more we do something, and this is the idea of like I think it's called titration, um of like you try a thing, you like just slightly push the boundary a little bit, and then you realize your nervous system is like, oh, we survived, okay, so that's okay, and then you do it a little bit more, and then your nervous system's like, yes, you survived, okay, cool, let's okay, that's okay, and then you just like slightly push that boundary out a little bit more, and that's how you expand your nervous system capacity, is like you give your nervous system new data of like, oh, and look, that didn't kill us. And you can do that with selling too.
I love that way of describing it, like titration. That's exactly it. And it's so, so helpful. Okay, so we talked about selling specifically. Let's talk about how embracing our unique brains and our unique needs benefits our business and life as a whole.
I mean, in every way imaginable. Like embracing your brain and how it works. It's like one of those things that you can't unsee once you start seeing it, and then you just start it becomes a snowball effect. As soon as you start learning, when I started learning about ADHD, when I first figured out I had ADHD, and I read a bunch of books because I'm a Ravenclaw. Um, I read a ton of books and I talked to my therapist a lot and I did a ton of research, and I just automatically started doing things in my life like, oh, look, yeah, of course. Like, yeah, let's do it this way and that'll be more ADHD friendly for me. And it's like once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. And doing it in your business has a huge ripple effect because your business is one, you spend a ton of your day in the like swimming in the pool of your business. And so that's a large chunk of your time where if you start accommodating yourself and running your business in a way that's more brain friendly for you, then you'll feel more energy. You're going to be more excited to do your business stuff. You're then going to have the ripple effect. And this is something I'm really passionate about, is when you start doing things in a way that works for you and it feels better for you and you're more excited about, then you're going to naturally be more enthusiastic about your business. And then that enthusiasm is going to have a ripple effect of your content being more resonant and your selling being more effective and your people connecting with you more. And then that's going to then have a ripple effect of more money. And then more money means you're going to be more enthusiastic about your business. It's like this huge feedback loop of awesomeness. And it really starts with doing things in a way that works for you. And yes, that takes experimentation and time, and, you know, experimentation takes time because you have to do things and then they fail and then you try them a different way and then they like kind of work, but then they fail, but then you try them a slightly different way and then it suddenly works. And it's like, that can be very, like you have to like stick with it through all those experiments, but the payoff is so big because it's such a huge ripple effect. Because then if you're suddenly having a great time in your business because you're accommodating your brain, you're going to start doing it in your real life too, like in your regular human life, and everything's going to be better there too. And it's this giant feedback loop of amazingness of like, wow, I have accommodated how I work, and instead of basically abusing myself to fit into what society says I should be, and suddenly everything's better. Shocker.
I love it, but I also want to touch on that last bit you just said. So, like, trying
Mm.
to fit into what society says I should be, because I think that's
Hmm.
one of the hardest things for me. I'm really like, it's still kind of early days for me in understanding myself in this certain ways. And I hear my inner voice sometimes, like, you should be better at that, or you should just have more energy, or you should just be able to do more calls. Because one of the things that I've done across the last year is drastically reduce the number of calls that I do. And working with clients, for example, on more asynchronous, like Voxer kind of thing. And that inner voice comes in and like, yeah, it's like, I should be better, or I wish I was better.
Mhm.
Is that an experience that is familiar to you? And how did you?
Oh, God, yeah.
Yeah.
God, yeah. And I think everyone experiences that, especially neurodivergent people. And unfortunately, I don't think it ever truly goes away. But I think what we have to do is train ourselves to, it's almost self-coaching, right? You recognize the pattern, the thought patterns that are happening and the things that you're telling yourself, and you get better and faster at it over time the more you do it, just like with any muscle that you work out. I catch myself still all the time being like, I should be more productive. I shouldn't be resting right now. I should be doing the dishes and being a better partner. Um, but then I have to catch myself, and I do catch myself and say, this is my capacity right now, or this is my capacity period. And that's okay. And recognizing the wins that you do have. I was just talking to my partner the other day about how like the bar of like the standard that you hold yourself to has to move day to day constantly. And like, sure, you can hold yourself to a high standard, and that's great because, some like ambition is a thing. And I love ambition. But holding yourself to a high standard is on a bar that doesn't move is self-abuse, basically. Um, because we're humans and we're dynamic creatures, and our energies shift, especially if you're a person with chronic illness or autism or any other reason that you might be a spoonie or have fluctuating energy levels. I have fluctuating energy levels constantly. And so everything is very fluid for me in my business and in my life. And my bar that I hold myself to is constantly shifting. Like some days are a 1 spoon day and some days are a 10 spoon day. And on 10 spoon days, I might get a lot done, but I can't hold myself to a 10 spoon day standard every day because that's not sustainable.
That's really, really helpful way of looking at it. Like I could totally see, like for me, yeah, I'm holding myself. It's also that thing you get of like, oh, but like last week I could handle all that. Last week I could
Hmm.
socialize with all these people and I was fine. And I actually kind of liked it. Well, last week I did all these calls with my clients and I was fine. And this week I can barely get dressed. And it's just that comparison even to yourself. I think it's so helpful that that thing you shared about the bar, like it gets to move and it has to actually.
Hmm.
It's so
Yeah.
helpful.
I think also there's something about recognizing your own patterns and cycles. So, like, for some people, an energy cycle might be a few days or a few weeks or a few months. For me, it's a few months. I tend to like be really high energy and like, look at all this thing I created and I made this cool thing and this cool thing and come by this cool thing for like, especially in the spring, I tend to be like that. And then in the fall and winter, I'm like, nobody look at me, nobody talk to me. I'm just going to put my head down and do client work and don't talk to me. And I used to experience that sudden shift, especially when the cycle is so long like that. I used to experience that and be like, I have to restructure my whole business. I'm clearly not wired for that high energy stuff. And then I restructured everything to be just put my head down and do client work. And then my energy cycle shifted and I was like, I'm fucking bored. I want to make things. I want to do stuff. I want to sell stuff. And so eventually over time, it took a long time, but I eventually realized, oh, this is just how my energy works. This is the cycle that I go through. Okay, how can I build that into my business so that it's an option? Once my energy shifts, I can put my head down and do client work without tanking things. And you can absolutely build that kind of flexibility into your business, but you have to recognize the cycles first and accept them and embrace them.
Yeah. so much self-awareness, so much self-compassion, especially getting it wrong
Mm-hmm.
along the way. And I think it's so true for me. Like there are times when, and I literally just, I swear, New Year's Eve, I was like, yeah, we have all these goals, so excited. And then it's just one thing after another and just like no energy. And I feel like my year didn't even start till April. And it's just
Yeah.
half of the difficulty. And I literally just recorded a podcast episode about this the other day. Half of the difficulty with that is literally just the not accepting of it. If I could just accept it and sometimes I'm a machine and I not not in a bad way. Like I will just churn stuff out and I will create and create just like you said. And that's actually a beautiful thing. I even
Hmm.
beat myself up about that though sometimes thinking, oh, I look so chaotic and like I'm just doing all the things.
Yeah.
But acceptance is
Yeah.
very needed. Yeah.
Yeah. And also like the beating self up thing. We have to accept that we do that sometimes too.
Yeah.
And one of the ways that I've done that is by externalizing it. So like when I have those thoughts, so my partner and I, we named anxiety Steve. And so when one of us is having like intrusive anxious thoughts or is like starting down a irrational emotional spiral, we're like, hey, Steve is lying to you. Steve's a liar. None of that is true. It's okay. And like separating those thoughts and like the beating yourself up stuff from your own identity, it has been very helpful for me and for us to be like, okay, that's a thing and it's okay, it happens. Steve is chatty sometimes. Um and we just gotta like give him a cookie and a Rubik's cube and send him into the corner and he'll be fine for a while and then he'll get chatty again and he'll come back and kind of just having to like figure out how to cohabitate with Steve um without taking on his thoughts as part of your identity.
Yeah. I love that. What are some things that you've actually like maybe you used to push against them in your brain or like wish that they weren't a part of you, but that actually have come to love now?
Ooh. Hmm.
Deep question.
That is a deep question. It can be so hard with questions like these because I've been on this journey for so long that it's like, okay, take yourself back. Take yourself back. Um, can we circle back to that? I gotta stew on that one a little bit.
Yeah, feel free. There was one other thing I wanted to ask you about actually, and this was something I noticed when I was applying for your summit. It was just you had this kind of short and sweet statement on the application form saying like, here, hey, here's what I stand for. Here's what I believe is that you like, do you want to proceed? I don't remember the word. It was like, do you agree with this? Do you want to proceed? Can you talk a little more about that? Because I know you said like when we chatted afterwards that you actually have a product about it. I was like, oh, okay, this sounds cool. Just tell us more about that.
Yeah, so that is I have a version of that kind of paragraph all over my business, all over my website. It's on all my sales pages and checkout pages. It's next to my sign up forms for like freebies and stuff. Basically, it's a value statement. I used to call it a values requirement. Now I call it I think a values check. But basically, I only want people in my orbit who are down to clown with the things that I believe in, the social justice things that I believe in, because uh I don't know. I mean, I talk about capitalism a lot. Like, if you don't like my social values, you're not going to like my content or how I teach. But also, the reason that I started doing that, so part of it, it started in 2020, and I created a requirements to work with me page. And that included a don't be a dick section of here are my values. If you have problems with that, please go away. Um, and it's evolved over the years. And that started in 2020 amidst the resurgence of Black Lives Matter protests and the George Floyd murder and all of that. And that was kind of my response and how I incorporate it. And that was what made me realize like, oh, this is important. Over time, it became as much about it was interesting the response that I saw to that page as I had clients client conversations, or conversations with prospective clients, I should say. I never had anyone respond negatively to it, but I had a lot of people be even more enthusiastic about working with me after seeing it. And that was a huge kind of realization for me of like, oh, this is important. This is powerful. People need this and want to hear this. And I also realized over time that it helped me feel safer as a gender fluid person. So I'm non-binary, but to all appearances, I look like a woman. And a lot of people read me as a woman. And gender stuff is very contentious, we'll say, right now. And I just don't want to expose myself or have to. I don't have the energy to deal with people who are like, but non-binary doesn't exist. But gender is blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, I have better things to do than deal with you educating people who are like, I dabbled in educating people about gender stuff, and it's just not for me. It's not my strong suit. It's not where I and my energy is best put towards making change in the world. And so this is a barrier that I put in place in order to protect myself and help me feel safer in my business. And also it helps, I have found, and part of the reason that I do it so visibly is that I want people in my community who have marginalized identities, whether they're gender fluid or people of color, um, or, trans or whoever, I want them to feel safe in my business as well. And part of creating safer spaces is being transparent about your values, because otherwise we're left guessing. And I know from experience that guessing sucks because sometimes you get it wrong.
Mhm.
So that's where that started. And with the speaker application, it was important to me to have that. I actually had it like the tech set up so that you couldn't even fill out the form unless you clicked I agree.
Yeah.
Like it wouldn't even populate the form. And it was even more important to me to have that there because I don't want to be promoting and kind of co-signing someone's business and message who promotes values that go against things that I believe. Um, that's not really something I want to be doing. So it was even more important to me to have that on the speaker form just as much as anywhere else in my business.
Thank you for sharing that. Actually, I think if you, I'll include a link to your offer that you have about this.
Yeah.
Um, what's it called?
It's called Attract the Best, Repel the Rest.
Perfect.
So the course is very focused on the requirements to work with me strategy that I used in the beginning as a client-based business. But I am always adding to it content about like how I've experimented with it more as a course-based business. And there's journal prompts in there to help you figure out like which values are the ones that you want to put as your like values requirements. I'm really proud of that course. It's pretty great. And it's only $9.
$9. Okay, perfect. I'm definitely gonna get it. So thank you for sharing all of that, like how it helps you to feel safer, how it helps you to, work with the people you work with and not have to do that education piece as well. And I think it really goes back to what we were saying about kind of how we can tie ourselves in knots about doing the wrong thing or the right thing,
Yeah.
blah, blah. If you take that stand and make your values clear from the outset, I think that it helps us to feel more free to say what we want to say about that stuff.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like everyone is free to believe what they want to believe, and that is great.
Mhm.
But kind of my business is my home, and I don't want you in my living room if, you know, you don't like believe most of the things that I believe. Like there are certain things, and this is something I talk about in the course as well, is like there are certain, like you just have to figure out like which ones are your non-negotiables.
Yeah.
And which ones you're like, oh yeah, it's fine. But there was something I wanted to mention when you were talking about being afraid of like messing it up or getting like splashback. I actually have a story about that. So with the very first run of the Neurodivergent Entrepreneur Summit, so like how it's set up is the event itself is free, but you can sign up, you can like upgrade to the All Access Pass, which I call the Busy Brains Pass, to get ongoing lifetime access to all the presentations and all these bonuses and stuff, and it's great. And when you sign up, and this is industry standard for online summits, there's a timer and you have however much time and you get like a super mega discount on the All Access Pass. The first time I ran the summit, I decided to have the timer exactly as taught. I pushed it, like 15 minutes is so fast. So I did 30 minutes, and that was the higher end of what was being taught in the course that I was taking about how to run a summit. But I was like, I don't know, but I can't think of any alternatives. So let's just do it as taught and see how I feel about it and see what happens. And then we'll pivot for the next one. And I got a handful of emails from people who were like, this countdown timer feels counterintuitive to the like ethical anti-capitalist values driven stance that you have within the event. What's going on? This feels weird. And most people were very polite about it, which was great. And I was just very transparent. I was like, hey, this is what was taught. I decided I wasn't sure about it either when I was first setting it up, but I decided to do it as taught and see how it felt. I have since realized this does not feel good for me. But we're already halfway through registration. There's nothing I can do about it now. Here's my temporary, imperfect solution. So what I did was, because I had some people email be like, oh, I signed up when I was at the grocery store and I was totally going to upgrade, but then I forgot because I was looking at cereal and then I got home and it's 3 hours later and the discount's gone. And I was like, hey, totally get it. ADHD audience. I feel you. Here's a discount code and here's a code where you can have the discount still. It was an imperfect solution because people only got it if they were emailing me, but it was now that I'm doing it, I don't like this. This is not values aligned for me, but I can't do anything about it now because we're halfway through it. Temporary imperfect solution. And I explained that in my response to someone who emailed in and was like, this doesn't feel right. And I was like, hey, I agree with you. Here's my temporary solution. I'm going to pivot. I'm learning from this. Thank you for like seeing that and calling me in. And they responded and were so polite and so supportive of like, thank you for explaining that. It's really awesome that you're like willing to learn and experimenting with stuff. They were so supportive, and it was just about being transparent and like, hey, we're all human and we screw up sometimes, and that is part of the process. It's part of the experience of being a human being, and especially a human being who is very in tune with their values and their ethics. And you are going to mess it up sometime. And I almost wonder if you just accept that it's inevitable that you're going to mess it up, it's less freaky when you do. Because you're like, hey, this was going to happen at some point. It's fine. You come up with an imperfect Band-Aid solution, and then the next time you do it differently. And so then last year, for the second run of the Neurodivergent Entrepreneur Summit, I had the timer be 12 hours, which is unheard of in the online summit space, and added like an email reminder to the email sequence, like, hey, just so you know, that discount's going away in case you forgot about it. And I saw absolutely no like downward, there was no negative effect to my sales. I actually made the exact same number of All Access Pass sales as I did last year, and it was comparable registrations. So the conversion rate was pretty much the same. It was like 1% less. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. So it became my pivot then was to make it kind of like we were talking about earlier, was to, yes, keep it as a helpful decision-making container, but make it longer so that it's not preying on people's anxiety, and is also have reminders built in, like little fail safes built in for people who are ADHD and forgot about it but really wanted to sign up. And like just taking into consideration all the different identities that I'm interacting with and building in all these different structures to make it brain friendly for them while still supporting my business and selling, because ultimately, capitalist soup, we have to make money.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that example. Such a great example, firstly, of how you being transparent about your values from the outset opened up this conversation for you to have with people in your audience, and also how you got to tweak things as you went. You know, you got to figure it out, trial and error, and find the right way for you. And it didn't have a negative impact, which is just great as well.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I was I worked with an anti-racist coach last year, and one of the things that I learned with her was that transparency is actually like one of the core tenets of, what was it? One of the things I learned with her were like the 10 like core tenets of white supremacy, and then the opposite of all of those things, and one of the opposites was transparency. And that really solidified for me, like, okay, cool. Everything is see-through now. And it makes it so much easier when you're like, I want to be values aligned, but I'm gonna screw it up sometimes. Transparency is the answer.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Such an important conversation. Thank you. Okay. I'm going to ask you 3 quick fire questions before we wrap up the interview. The first one, you've definitely spoken to this, is beyond financial success, what impact do you want to have in the world through your work?
Beyond my own financial success, I want to be a model and a permission slip for others to build their businesses and live their lives in ways that work better for their brains and help them embrace their brains, and like self-love and self-acceptance hand in hand with financial success.
Perfect. Question 2, if you could give a message of inspiration and encouragement to past you earlier on in your business journey, what would that be?
It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. There were so also, I think I was always very tangled up in finding the right path or the correct path, especially regarding like niching and target audiences and models. And I've since realized like I have about a 2-year attention span with any particular like signature offer. I get bored and my positioning shifts constantly. And it's like, that's fine. That's okay. Nothing is, there is no correct path. There's the path that feels right and works. And that's it. And each new path will lead into another new path and will lead into another new path. And there's no correct trajectory. There's no linear path. It's all, honestly, it's all whatever you want it to be.
And finally, what does soulful selling mean to you?
Soulful selling for me means selling that is very focused on true, actual connection between me and the person I'm selling to or people I'm selling to. So it means vulnerability and authenticity and good intention, positive intention, not just extraction.
I agree. Bonus question, if you have an answer now, what is one thing
Oh yeah.
Self in your brain that you celebrate and love that maybe you used to resist.
I think I'm gonna go with my chaos.
I love that.
I am an absolute chaos gremlin. And um I there's always there's always pressure to be less chaotic in the world, in the neurotypical existence, but also internally of like if I was less chaotic, then I'd be making more money. If I was more organized, I'd be able to communicate with my VA better. But I have really fully embraced my chaos in the last year or two. So much so that I made my legal business name when I finally filed for an LLC, Chaos Gremlin Co. LLC.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that I remembered to ask the question again because I love
Yeah,
the answer.
yeah.
This has been such a like a really, I don't know, really affirming conversation. I love it. Thank you so much.
I love hearing that. That makes me really happy to hear. And yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I love conversations like this. It's very yeah, it's very fulfilling and satisfying and um yeah, I don't know what adjectives to use right now, but it feels good.
And for more of this, go and sign up for the summit because registrations will be open now. I'm going to
Yes.
record a little bit to go at the
Yes.
end here about that as well.
Absolutely. Yes. There will be links.
And if you want to find out more about Claire and their work, you can find them at clairepaniccia.com. Follow them on Instagram at clairepaniccia and make sure you sign up for the free Neurodiverse Entrepreneur Summit at ruthpoundwhite.com/NE Summit, all one word. I am a speaker and I can promise you it is looking amazing behind the scenes. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Soulful Sales. If you have a moment to rate and review, know that it really does make a difference. And if you'd like to carry on the conversation, then you can connect with me on Instagram at Ruth Poundwhite, sign up to my newsletter at ruthpoundwhite.com/newsletter, or my personal favourite, join me inside the low ticket membership at ruthpoundwhite.com/membership. And keep doing what you're doing because your work really does matter.